brothers, it's great to see so many people here tonight. I understand they're making a show out here, and so I know it's hard to get here in part. But it shows how much interest and support there is for the Cuban Revolution. And we're going to have a very, very special event tonight, discussion with Andres Gomez. I want to start tonight by acknowledging the passing of a great man this morning. Roberto González Severert was the brother of René González, one of the Cuban Five. Roberto suffered for several years from cancer, and in the midst of his illness, he never stopped fighting, organizing, speaking, defending the Cuban Five. And I want to have first a moment of silence, but also a great grito for him. When I say Roberto González, I want everyone to say presente. So if we could just please have a moment of silence and think about Roberto and the Five. Roberto González. Presente. As you may know, René González was released. He was the first to be released after serving more than 13 years in federal prison for the crime of saving people from U.S.-sponsored terrorism, like the other Cuban Five. And he, as soon as he got out last October, the judge has ordered René to serve 3 years probation, another part of his unjust sentence, in southern Florida, in the very district where the terrorists reside. And there was a motion by his attorney to allow him to go home and see his brother, which he was able to do for 2 weeks. And René returned, because he's a man of honor, and said, I will return, even though it's an unjust sentence. And the attorney has filed another motion today to ask for the right of René to serve the rest of his probation in Cuba. Probation is supposed to be for rehabilitation and reinsert yourself back into society. This is not his society. René is from Cuba. His family is in Cuba. And Andres was a very close friend of Roberto, and I hope he can also speak about Roberto, but it's a very truly sad passing. He was an attorney and was on the legal team from day one. And we'll have more in our website and our listservs that we send out about him in the days that come, but we were on the road today and when we heard of his passing. How many people here have not heard of the Cuban Five yet? Great.
Orange County.
That explains it.
Orange County presente.
Welcome to civilization.
The Cuban Five, for some may not know that much about them, but the Cuban Five are 5 Cuban patriots who came into the U.S. starting in 1990 on a mission, a clandestine mission, infiltrated into terrorist groups and helping support the agents that were in Miami. They never had a weapon. They were peaceably on a mission, using their eyes and ears to watch and keep monitoring these well-known and identified terrorist organizations in Miami, which have been responsible with the U.S. government of killing more than 3,400 Cubans, 3,478 to be exact, in the years of the revolution. And in 1998, September 12th, the FBI, after having the Cuban Five and others under surveillance, arrested them and charged them with, among other charges, conspiracy to commit espionage, something they never did. Espionage is spying on the U.S. government. That wasn't their target. The target was the terrorists, unless the U.S. considers the terrorist part of the U.S. government, which really they are, in fact. And they will have been in prison 14 years now. They've gone through so many years of appeals. It's this long process of twisted injustice. In 2005, August 9, with the efforts of their appeals attorneys, who were also their trial attorneys, they won an unprecedented victory the appeals court in Atlanta, the 11th Circuit, for the first time in U.S. history of federal court. It had never happened before, and unfortunately it hasn't happened yet because it was overturned. But what the attorneys had argued in the trial was men who were defending Cuba inside of the terrorist nest that Miami is cannot possibly get a fair trial in Miami. And yet, despite the proof that was shown by the attorneys, the judge said Miami is fine for these men to be tried. And then 4 years later, in August, the 3-judge panel ruled that Miami was not possible for a fair trial and overturned all the 5's convictions and ordered a trial within 18 months to take place. But unfortunately, the Bush administration appealed, and the full panel, 12 judges of the 11th Circuit, reviewed the case and said, no, Miami was fine. And they've been through other appeals. 2 of their life sentences were reduced. But 100 miles northeast of us, northeast of Los Angeles, is Gerardo Hernandez in Victorville Prison. He has a double life sentence, which means you do not get out. There is no such thing as parole for life in federal prison. That was something that changed in the 1990s. And he, like the others, never harmed anyone. Never harmed anyone, but it was a very politically charged and deliberate conviction against Gerardo. To make a short story, because we have a long program tonight, it was found a year after their victory of the Cuban Five, although it was overturned later. The convictions were completely reinstated a year after their court victory. It was discovered by a reporter in the Miami Herald who did a Freedom of Information Act request of the U.S. government. And he stumbled upon it. He didn't expect to find this information. That 10 journalists in Miami, including the 2 principal papers, the Miami Herald and the Nuevo Herald, which is the Spanish equivalent, were on the U.S. government payroll, starting in at least 1999. That was a scandal in the city, a huge scandal, because to write for the press, that you tend to be independent and yet work secretly for the government. They were working for Radio and TV Martí, which is the U.S. official propaganda stations that emit broadcasts, constant lies, campaigns against Cuba, with the stated intent of trying to help overthrow the revolution. And it's prohibited by U.S. law for any of that broadcasting to come back into the U.S. It's called the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948. So with this information, the National Committee to Free the Cuban Five, which has people in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and other cities, and Andres has worked with us for many years now since their conviction, we have done endless research. Some young people here have helped be part of that, and we have uncovered dozens of journalists more in Miami, including those journalists who know not only were being paid by the U.S. government, secretly working for Radio and TV Martí. They were covering the case of the Five from the time of the arrest and even before in the most scandalous, outrageous lies. On the day of the jury going to deliberation, and a jury, by the way, which was not sequestered, for a criminal case of heavy charges, this jury went home every day to be subject to all the media propaganda, even though the judge told them not to read the press. You couldn't expect that. And one of the journalists, just to give you an example, on the day the jury had to go decide guilt or innocence, this reporter, paid by the government, writes an article saying, I interviewed a defector from Cuba, a spy, won't give his name, but he tells me that he has to speak out because of the Cuban Five case. And he says that Cuba gives LSD and other hallucinogens to control the minds of their agents when they send them abroad. Now, is that prejudice? It's more than prejudice, it's lies intended to influence and condemn men, to influence a jury and condemn men. And this is the reason, the research we have done, the work we have done, in addition to all the political events like tonight's forum, is the reason why they have appeals active right now. They have their final appeal, thanks to the Clinton administration in 1996 signed the effective death penalty and anti-terrorism law, which limits federal inmates to only one habeas corpus in their imprisonment, and it has to be done a year after their direct appeal. So the five, this is their last legal stage, their last legal battle, and so what we're doing is absolutely critical. We are working every day now with the attorneys. They have a new attorney, a very well-known First Amendment attorney, one of the most prominent in the country. We're very glad he's joined. His name is Martin Garbus from New York City, and he will be seeing Gerardo very soon. His sole purpose in the case is to delve further into the issue of the U.S. paid journalists. So we hope people understand the importance of this, the importance of every event for the five, and for us to keep in touch with you and inform you of any emergency, anything happening. We ask that you make sure and sign up the petition, sign your name to support them, call on Obama to free them, and if it's after the elections, who's ever the next president, if it's Obama, who else? Who else? To demand their freedom. It doesn't matter what their sentence is, we demand their freedom. And the email, to put your email clearly on the petition, is so important for us. We thank you so much for being here. We want to hear more about the issue of Cuba, the issue of Miami from Andres, and to remember that there have been other losses, personal losses, in these 14 years for the families. Gerardo's mother passed away while he was in prison almost 2 years ago. They're suffering the loss of their families. But if you ever hear from any of the Cuban Five in letter or their messages that you can read on our website, freethefive.org, they have never regretted any day of their mission or any day of their imprisonment, because they hold their heads high. They're strong men, they're revolutionaries, they're heroes. Free the Cuban Five.